There we go. So, I normally, I should say, for those that don't know me, my name's Marty Cagan, and I have been doing exclusively technology products for my entire career, which has recently hit 35 years of just working with tech product teams. So it's probably as long as anybody that's been doing it, and I will tell you that what keeps me interested in this is I have been lucky. My offices are in San Francisco. I get to work with some very impressive product teams, companies that you all know. And I also get introduced to companies that are less impressive, let's say. And I am shocked by the difference between how the great companies work and how most companies work. And that difference is kind of what keeps me doing this. I think that difference is terrible. It's inexcusable, especially in the year 2018, as you'll see. I think it's just ridiculous that we have such a huge difference. And I want to be clear, I am not talking about the difference between Silicon Valley and Hungary or Europe. I'm actually talking about the difference in San Francisco between the best companies and right across the street. So it's a worldwide problem. In fact, many of the best product teams I know today are scattered all over. Several of them are in Israel, several of them are in India, more than a few are in Shanghai, China. They're just everywhere. Berlin, they're all over. But it's not evenly distributed. Like I said, most of these teams are not very. Most of the teams are using, honestly, practices and techniques from many, many years ago. And there's just no excuse for that. Now, I will also say that most of the time, my favorite topic and what I like to talk about a lot is this topic. Mostly when I work with teams, it's on this. I love to help companies solve hard problems. That's really what technology product is. It's solving hard problems. In particular, it's solving hard problems in ways that our customers actually love, but that also work for our business. Has to also work for our business. We talk about that, meaning it's got to be usable, valuable, feasible, and viable, business viable. And that's what product discovery is. It's coming up with a solution that has those four characteristics or addresses those four risks. And that's hard. I mean, think about it. That's what's hard. And I can talk all day, actually, and I do often. I will, later this week, I will have a full day with a large group of people where we will talk about only this. There are more than 100 techniques today in modern product discovery. They're generally oriented around these four risks: value, usability, feasibility, viability. And then we have a set of qualitative and a set of quantitative techniques for all of those. So you can start to see how it could easily take us a full day to talk about the modern techniques. But I will say that's not what I'm planning to talk about today, even though this is my favorite topic. And it's because I have seen so many times that it's not that hard. If you give me a competent team, I can quickly show them the techniques that they need to work. But all too often, what I find out is that, yes, they know how to work now, but their company doesn't actually allow them to work the way they need to, which, of course, really kills me. This is terrible. And I decided, because for the most part of my career, I didn't worry about those companies because I get to work with the best ones that don't have that problem. But I started to realize that outside of that bubble of Silicon Valley especially, that most of the world, again, even in the Bay Area, but most of the world is not lucky enough to work for the kind of company I'll be talking about. And so what I wanted to talk about today is this idea of, of truly empowered teams. Truly empowered teams. Now, I realize that word empowered is, it's a buzzword today, right? Everybody says it. But it literally is the correct word. This is, if you look up the definition, first of all, I think you'll see that most teams are not empowered. And it's easy to convince you that that's the case. We'll talk about that. Most teams are not. But I also want to show you the difference because that gets to the heart of what's different about great teams. So I want to drill into this idea of truly empowered teams. Now, at a high level, very high, let's just talk about what that really means. It's just very delayed for whatever reason here. I think we're going to go old school and press the button. All right. So, in most organizations out there, the technology teams, I'm using that term loosely, Scrum teams, engineering teams, product teams, but the technology teams exist to serve the business. In fact, so often I hear that phrase, the business. And whenever you hear that phrase, that is to me, that's a bad sign. That's a clear sign, in fact, that they are not using the best practices I'm going to talk about. And that is what they think the purpose of the technology teams is. On the other hand, in a strong product organization, the kind I'm trying to convince people to do, they have a very different purpose in life. The purpose of a product team is to serve our customers, not our colleagues in other parts of the company. We serve our customers in ways that our customers love, but work for our business. And that, hopefully you can start to see. That's only a few words different, but that changes absolutely everything. And by the way, we're going to talk about this later this afternoon too, but if you really want to know at the very simplest level why most companies fail in their digital transformation efforts, it's this. They're not doing this. It boils down to this. All right. So what I wanted to talk about was really go into what it takes to be truly empowered product teams and what that really means to not just to us on the teams, but to the organization overall. Let's just jump in. The first thing I'd really like to say is that I am not even close to the first person to talk about how truly empowered product teams are a good thing. This is so old. We have known this for so long. When I was first trained in product, I was trained in this model. This is not new. These are just my 10 favorite books on the topic. There's many more I've read. I just wanted to limit it to 10. Several more that I think are actually quite good. These are terrific books. I think you should read all of them. They're inspiring. You might notice several of them talk about the military because in the military, especially in special forces, if you're not an empowered team, it is literally a life or death thing. And so it's very clear. So they've been arguing the importance of empowered teams for a long time. But Work Rules is talking about Google's model, and Creativity Inc. talks about Pixar's model. They're all worth reading, honestly. Especially, I love that book, Principles, by Ray Dalio. Talks about Bridgewater, another company, very successful company's model. But this idea of truly empowered teams is a powerful idea, but for some reason, it hasn't convinced hardly any companies to adopt it. This is crazy. So it's not because people don't realize empowered teams are important. There is something else. Now, a lot of my work, I get a lot of introductions from the venture capital community. They have invested in a company, and if the company is not doing that well, I may be introduced to them and see what might be going on. And very often, I will quickly figure out, and you'll see, it's not hard to find out which model the company is in. It's easy. But then I'll sit down with the CEO and say, well, I can tell you right now what's wrong at the high level. You're using a very old, it's often called the command and control model. Or sometimes we refer to it as you're not a product culture organization. Have you heard that? Or product mindset organization. We say you're an IT mindset or a project mindset or project culture organization. And I said, and then I asked the CEO, why is that? And usually, when I press them enough, they will give me an honest answer. They don't trust the teams. Honestly, they don't trust the teams. Now, sometimes we get into this discussion about, okay, well, why don't they trust the teams? And I had just met many of those teams, and I understand. And so they'll point out, look, you've met those teams. They're not at the level where I can trust them with this. We need our executives to tell them what to do. And I point out to them, well, okay, maybe that's true, but if it's true, whose fault is that? Who hired these people, right? It's this executive, it's the CEO's fault. It really is. That's where the responsibility stops, right there. And so what we need to do, and I try to explain to them, you need to trust your teams. You need to get teams in place that you can trust. And that starts the dialogue I really want to have with you, is this idea of trust. Now, we'll come back to that several times. First, what I wanted to do was talk about 3 companies that everybody knows. Actually, just yesterday, I was going to say these are the 3 most valuable companies in the world, but you might have read, just yesterday, Microsoft moved from number 4 to number 3, which actually I'm very happy for Microsoft because it's great to see them coming back, and I think by their new leadership is bringing back a lot of what used to make Microsoft strong. So I like that, but it kind of messes with my slide a little bit. So, and you'll see why in a second, because what I'm about to tell you is not, to my knowledge, true with Microsoft. But it is true with these 3 companies. And I also haven't been inside the core Microsoft like I have with these companies. So many of you have, if you've maybe even visited these 3 companies, you know that they each actually have, well, they're all awesome at tech product. That's really what made them this successful. That's not a secret. But I will tell you that all 3 of them have very different cultures. In fact, you could argue that they have 3 diametrically opposed cultures. Now, they're all great at product, but still within that, they have very different philosophies on how it's like to work there and how they like, how they feel things like work-life balance, how important or not that is, things like that. And so what I wanted to point out was these are 3 of the most valuable companies in the world. They're all proven exceptionally good at technology-powered product. But what most people don't realize is that even though they have 3 different cultures, they actually have the most important thing in common, which actually can be traced to this one person. His name was Bill Campbell. He unfortunately did pass away a couple years ago, but he was known as the coach of Silicon Valley. So very little known, but tremendously important fact. This guy personally coached for over a decade Steve Jobs at Apple, Larry and Sergey at Google, and then Eric Schmidt when he joined, and Bezos at Amazon. During the formative years for all 3 of these companies, he was actually showing the founders how to build a tech product company. Now, nobody knows that because he hated any publicity. In fact, about 10 years ago, I wrote an article about him, and I asked him to review it. And he said, look, I want all the attention on the people I coach, not on me. So a very modest person. But I will tell you, and I would say I was not lucky enough to be coached by him, but I was lucky enough to be coached and managed by several people that were directly coached by him. So I consider myself a beneficiary of him. But to get to, I could talk for an hour easily about what he preached and believed, but I love this quote because it really captures to me what is consistent about Apple, Amazon, Google, for example. What is consistent? This idea that leadership is actually about recognizing the greatness in everyone and putting an environment in place where that greatness can emerge. Now that sounds almost corny, but if you know him, he was sincere about this, truly sincere. And this, if you think about it, all three of those companies, all four of those founders had their own way of doing this, but they all, I would argue, did this, and still to this day do this. All three of those companies have this model in mind, and I'll try to convince you of that as we go on. And this is the essential difference between a Google and most companies. This is the key difference. And it's surprising to a lot of people. It's not the people they hire, it's the environment that they're hired into. That's what really lets them do great work. Okay. So he talked about leadership, and I want to start by focusing on the role of leadership. And let's get into that. And the first thing you might notice is I'm distinguishing between the responsibilities of leadership and management. Now, of course, pretty much every leader is a manager also, not all of them, but not all managers are leaders. So to me, it's important to talk about them separately. For those that don't know, Mike Fisher, he's actually the CTO of Etsy. Do you guys know Etsy, the big marketplace based in Brooklyn? So Etsy is a terrific product company, and he runs their CTO. I first met him, though, 20 years ago when he was the CTO of PayPal, which you all know, and at the same time, Marty Abbott, who I didn't put his picture up here, but he kind of looks like a bigger, stronger version of me, actually. But Marty was the CTO of eBay at the time, so we were all friends. Marty and Mike, though, they are two of the best leaders of any flavor. They're both CTOs, but two of the best leaders I've ever known. And I don't think that's an accident. Both of them went to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and both of them served in special forces. And in those environments, leadership is not something, it's not a little management training program you go to on the side. It's something that is right at the core of their survival. So I think that's why they're so great at leadership. And I love this quote of theirs, which I've written about before, that the idea is leadership is about inspiring the teams to great accomplishment, and management is about helping them get to those objectives. So we will talk about that. We'll talk about both. And let's start with leadership. Now, I don't have much time with you. I could easily speak for the entire day on this one topic of the role of leadership. I often do, actually, with companies. But I just want to make sure in a few minutes here that we're all have a common understanding of what the responsibilities of the leaders actually are if you want to have empowered product teams. It's not easy to get empowered product teams. It's actually harder to get empowered product teams. One of the most common frustrations out there in our industry is, of course, over the last 15 years, almost every organization has moved to Agile. It's hard to find a team that hasn't moved to some form of Agile. But it's no secret that most organizations say, yeah, that didn't get us very much. And it doesn't get them very much. And the big reason it doesn't get them very much is this idea of empowered teams. And so I'd like to point out one of the things that Agile mistakenly, most of the people that advocate and teach Agile mistakenly think is that in order to have Agile, you need your managers to back off and stop managing. But it turns out that's exactly backwards. What you need them to do is manage, but manage not in a command and control way. That's what they're trying to say. So let's talk about the 5 big responsibilities of leadership. The first one is product vision. So imagine you are, the truth is if you're an early stage startup with like less than 10 engineers, this is kind of a non-issue. Everybody knows what we're doing. But let's say you have got 100 engineers in your company. Let's say you've got on the order of 20 product teams, which is more typical for a medium-sized company. How do you make sure that all 20 of those teams know the common objective, what we're all trying to accomplish? That's the vision. That is hugely important. This is often referred to as the North Star, meaning that every team understands how their work contributes into a bigger whole. The vision is typically somewhere between 3 years and 10 years out in the future. And I should also say the reason vision is so important, one of the big reasons, is it's our single best recruiting tool for the kind of people we need to hire for truly empowered teams. So this is good product people, good designers, good engineers want to work on a meaningful vision. They want purpose. That's what the vision gives us. So the vision is critically important in the start of their responsibilities. The product strategy now, this is where if we've got a 5-year product vision, and today, we're just getting started, or we're 5 years away from that. So we need a plan to get from here to there. Now that plan is not at all a roadmap, it's not at all a schedule or anything like that. That plan that's what we call the product strategy. It is usually a sequence of product market fits. Okay, product market fits. But it can be a strategy based on personas. It can be a strategy based on data milestones. There's a lot of different ways we can do it. But the point is, we can't fall into that trap of building, pleasing everybody with one product release. That's what we want to avoid. That's the product strategy. That vision is rounded out with the product principles, which speak to the nature of the kinds of products we're doing. Product principles are a little trickier to explain, but they're very powerful. Often we'll have, if you've got 10, 20 product teams, even when they're all doing their best, they might want to do things that make sense from their world, but doesn't make sense for the customer overall. Because you've heard that, optimizing locally versus optimizing globally. Principles help us with that. They help us understand the trade-offs that we'll make to avoid conflicts or resolve conflicts. Just as a simple example, early eBay had basically a buyer team and a seller team, and then a couple other teams around trust and safety and search. But the money came from the sellers. So the seller team was doing things to make money. And that's great until they started doing things the sellers really were pushing for that were bad for buyers. And that created some real conflict. And we realized we were missing a product principle. In their case, that product principle was there was really only one reason the sellers were actually coming to eBay to sell. It's because we had the buyers. And if we lose the buyers, we will lose the sellers. And that principle helped us realize that if the needs are in conflict, we have to go for the needs of the buyer, not the seller. That's an example of a product principle. So again, this is part of that context that teams need. Product priorities. I'm an advocate for a technique called OKRs. Just quick show of hands, how many of you are doing okay? About half of you. So OKRs are, they're kind of, they've actually been around 20 years, but they are finally kind of getting traction in a lot of the companies. But I will also say there's tremendous confusion out there about how to use them and what they're for. And because really the purpose is the alternative to roadmaps. The point here, though, is OKRs in a tech product company are done at 2 levels. At the organizational level, the leaders have to decide what are the priorities for the business this year. None of us can do all the things we want to do. That's pretty obvious. But if leaders don't actually declare and set the priorities, then all 20 teams will assume different things about what's important. The only way teams can actually work on their part intelligently is if they have that bigger picture of the priorities. So we'll talk about the team's use of OKRs next in a bit. But the leaders have to define the objectives for the organization. And then the final one is evangelism. One of the most underappreciated roles of leaders. And this is something that the bigger the company is, the more critical this is. The leaders have to constantly evangelize. There's a great quote in our industry that's actually from John Doerr, who coincidentally was the guy who brought OKRs from Intel to Google, actually. But unrelated to that, but very related to the topic of my talk, John Doerr says, we need teams of missionaries, not teams of mercenaries. So that first model I showed you where the teams are there to serve the business, that is the mercenary model. The engineers are told, just shut up and code this. In the missionary model, the teams, engineers, product, and design are told, your job is to figure out a way to solve this. Whatever way you think best, but you have to solve it. And in order to have missionaries, you have to believe. And the purpose of evangelism is to get the teams of missionaries to be believers in that vision. And that's a lot of persuasion and talking and making sure people understand why this is a good thing to do. All right, so those are the 5 big responsibilities of leadership. I want to also give you examples of these people because the best ones I know are just ordinary people that have really set up these environments that we're talking about. The first one is actually an example of a founder and now CEO, founder. Stacey was a veterinarian, right? Takes care of animals in a small town in the mountains, actually, in the U.S. And she was frustrated because I don't actually know what it's like. I've never talked to a company in this industry in Europe, but in the US, the technology for veterinarians was just awful. I mean, really nothing. Old school vendors, just terrible support, terrible offerings. And anyway, she felt that this was not good, and she felt that the result of this was that the animals and the owners were not getting the care they needed. And so she decided, after a few years of waiting for somebody to solve this problem, she just figured, well, she's going to do it. And because I will tell you, one of the characteristics of great product people at every level, from a CEO down to an individual contributor product manager, is that they know what they don't know. They know what they can't know. Right? We'll talk about that. And they also admit what they don't know. Another way of saying that is they're humble. They don't pretend they know things they don't. The reason, in my opinion, Stacey went from knowing nothing about the tech industry to first learning all about product, then learning all about engineering and management. She teamed up with a set of developers, but she had to become an engineering manager. She had to learn all about user experience design. She had to learn all about marketing, all about sales. She had to learn all about business development, about fundraising. Think of that, the whole spectrum. I was an advisor and also investor in the startup, so I watched her go from knowing none of this, but the big advantage she had was that she knew she didn't know it. And she's a smart person with the right attitude. It is amazing how fast those people learn. And I will also say, she's totally passionate, genuinely passionate about the problem that her company is trying to solve. And she has attracted a set of investors, employees, customers that have that same passion for that solution. And their little company has disrupted that space. They have thousands of raving fan customers. Exactly what you want as a startup. All right, so Let's talk now about the role of management in this. And again, this could be many of the same people that are your leaders, but let's talk about them separately. I love this Steve Jobs quote because so many people seem to misunderstand his legacy. And I think this gets to the heart of what we're talking about. Again, you don't hire smart people and tell them what to do. You don't hire smart people and give them a roadmap of features to build. That is a waste of your talent. And by the way, the results aren't going to be very good if you do it that way. That's another talk. That's my discovery talk. We hire smart people so that they can tell us the best ways to actually solve the problems we have as a company. So that's what we're looking for. And that really is the role of management. So same thing, the topic of management is a huge topic, but I want to make sure we're on the same page because there are 3 essential responsibilities of the managers. And we need to go through this. And I will also say this is where most companies fall down here. The first is staffing. Their primary responsibility is to recruit the team. And a lot of them, there's a lot of things that go wrong here. I'm going to talk more about that in a few minutes, a lot of things that go wrong. But let me just say here that it is the responsibility of the, now, of course, when I say managers, just to be clear, I don't mean product managers. They're not managing people. And I don't mean product marketing managers. I mean the people managers, especially those that manage product managers, manage designers, and manage engineers. Those are the 3 in particular I'm focused on. Now, of course, we usually have some help from a human resources group, some HR, but that is anybody who thinks staffing will happen through HR, it's not happening. HR is there to help sometimes, but it's on the product, it's on the hiring manager. They have to source, they have to recruit, they have to interview, they have to close, means getting them to actually join the team. They have to onboard, and then they have to manage their performance. And if they can't actually do the job, they have to correct that. That's staffing. That's the first responsibility of the people managers. The second is the biggest, though. This is the part, and this is the part I think that has really suffered in the last several years. I didn't even realize how lucky I was. I didn't mention my history, but I started as an engineer at HP, Hewlett-Packard, for the first 10 years of my career. I wrote software. But I will tell you, through that entire 10 years at HP, every single day, I had at least one people manager whose job it was, explicitly, was to help me learn my job really and how to get better at my job. And I thought that's what everybody had. And then I went on to other companies and I realized, in fact, I will say more often than not today when I meet a product manager or I meet a designer and it's clear to me that they do not know how to do their job, I will ask, who is helping you learn these competencies? And there is no clear answer. Everybody usually has some kind of manager, but that doesn't mean the manager knows how to coach them, and it doesn't mean they're willing to coach them. So this is a huge hole. We have a lot of, you can also start to see if this is how your teams are, you can understand why the CEO is not comfortable trusting the teams. So that's where this ties together. So I argue to people managers, their number one responsibility is to coach their employees to at least to competence, to a level of competence. And then we like to coach them to the next level so that we can promote them. And good people managers know their success is a function of getting their people promoted. It means they're working them through their skills and getting them better and better. So I would love to see more, but I will tell you, it's really hard to have truly empowered product teams without managers that coach, really coach. All right, and the final responsibility are these objectives, especially if you're using a system like OKRs. One of the most common anti-patterns I see is a company will try to use OKRs, and in their first quarter or two, it'll be a real mess. And it's because what's going on is the leaders may or may not have said what the company objectives are. A lot of times they don't. But they ask each team to propose their objectives. And I'm like, what are you thinking? So you've got 20 product teams, and somehow the 20 are going to propose the set of objectives that are going to roll up to make the board of directors happy with the results of the company. That's insane. This is crazy. That is not how the system is designed to work. The managers need to play an active role with each team. If you have a buyer team and a seller team, then obviously the managers have to go to that buyer team and say, look, this is the overall objectives for the company. These are the buyer-related objectives. What can you do on these objectives? And then, of course, the way it's supposed to work is the team looks at those objectives and says, well, we can do these key results. OKR stands for objectives and key results. And there's a back and forth there. But it's not going to happen randomly. It won't happen at random. Managers have to be proactive in this. Now, it should be obvious, but if a manager says, yes, we need you to work on growth, and yes, you should be able to get 30% growth, that's not an empowered team, and that's not the OKR model. It is fair for the manager to say, we need you to focus on growth, and then the team looks at it and says, we can do 10% or whatever. All right, so managers need to play a very active role in the actual objectives if you're working in an empowered model sense. All right. Here's another example. Christian is one of my favorite people managers. I met him more than 10 years ago at a company, and he wasn't one of the first people I met. He was somewhere in the middle of the organization. It was the CEO that brought me in, a very inspiring founder, fantastic, and he had a pretty inspired organization, but I met all these product managers in particular that were so exceptionally competent. And I will say also, this is not a technology hub of the US. This was in Richmond, Virginia, which is very much not a technology hub, let me just say, not known for technology. And all of a sudden there were these people that were excellent, the kind of people that would be hired anywhere and you'd love to work with. And I started asking about where did they learn, and I worked for Christian. And I met him, and once you meet this guy, you know why he's so awesome, and you know why people adore him. I was interested in his background. He's not actually American. He came from Nigeria, so he's an immigrant. And he told me that in Nigeria, he was at a school that had students from all over Africa. They brought 80 different languages, he said, across the entire spectrum, from very poor children to of very wealthy homes, the whole mix, everything. And he said, the main thing I learned in school in Nigeria was you have to work with everybody and you have to learn people. And oh man, did he do that. And even today, and I will also say today, I've seen him now at 3 companies, and every one of them he excels. First as a manager, today he's also a true leader. But anyway, that's what we're looking for in a great people manager. Which then leads us to the heart of this. We need to talk about the teams themselves, the product teams. In Spotify lingo, the squads. Because that's where the magic happens, right? There. Everything so far has been in putting the context in place so that these teams can do their work. So, we need to tackle this trust issue head on. Stephen Covey, many of you may know, he was a thought leader in teams, and he wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in my view, he nailed this a long time ago. Trust is a function of 2 things, competence and character. Now, those are both big topics. I'm going to talk about each in turn. I'll talk about character next, but competence is a critical point. I will tell you, in my opinion, obviously this is for me to talk about this topic with you, I have to be very frank and honest, because we have to admit when we're not an empowered team and why that happens. So I will tell you, the average competence of product managers, in my view, has gone down, not up, which is really frustrating to me because I've been trying for a long time to help raise it. My theory for that is because most product managers, the only training they have had, if any, is a certified Scrum product owner class, CSPO. And just so you know, that does not teach you to be a product manager. It teaches you how to administer Jira and take care of the backlog. It does not teach you how to lead a product. And that's a huge gap. It used to be that before Agile that managers knew that, and so they would train their people. Today, that seems to have been, getting worse. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a strong advocate. If your team's not using Agile, you have to fix that immediately. Just know that the product owner responsibility is a tiny part of the product manager job. A small part, maybe 10%, probably less. Okay, so competence is critical. Now, I see two problems out there. The hiring managers often, especially, this is less true with engineers, because most of the engineering managers have been engineers. But very often, the people hiring product managers into your company and the people hiring designers into your company have not actually. They don't know what good looks like. They have never seen it in their career. So how can they hire competent people? Now, what they often do is they think, okay, I don't know, but I want to hire Google people or Netflix people because I know they're awesome. This idea of rock stars, we're going to hire rock stars. And of course, the first thing is they often find that, no, they don't really want to come work for them, those people. So then what happens? Then they start lowering the bar on other areas. The most common one they lower it on is our next topic, character. And so they might be able to find somebody that's, quote, rock star, but they come with a lot of baggage, let's say. And this is, I'll talk about this next, but this is a really big problem. But if you've ever heard the old expression that A's hire A's and B's hire C's, this is how it plays out. It's reality. This is how it plays out. If the hiring manager does not know what good looks like, it's very hard for them to hire people at the right competency, let alone develop them to the right competency. So, yeah, I will also say this. Normally, we do hire competency. They don't have to be rock stars. We need people, though, that are competent. Now, sometimes, and I'm a big advocate for this, we don't hire based on competency, we hire based on potential. I feel like one of the things I'm most proud of is all the people I've hired on potential and coached them to awesomeness. I love to do that, but you can only hire on potential if you have a manager, a people manager that is willing and able to coach them on a daily basis to get them to competence. If you don't hire based on potential. You've got to hire based on competence. All right. So let's talk next about character. Some of you may know the All Blacks. The All Blacks are the New Zealand rugby national team. The only reason, and very few Americans know them, that's for sure, but I will tell you, across all countries, across all sports, across the last 100 years, this is the most the most successful sport franchise in the world. 77% win percentage. It's just a really unprecedented. And they have a very defined culture. They do the haka. If you don't know what that is, after this session, you should look on YouTube. It's pretty fun. But they do this native New Zealand Maori war dance before so they're kind of famous for that expression. But they learned a long time ago that they get approached, as they're the best in the world, they get approached every day by amazingly skilled people. Some of them are amazing physical specimens that are literally the best at their position in the world. And they have learned, though, that if that person, no matter how skilled they are, if they are toxic, that they will actually hurt the team more than they will help the team. There's actually a professor at Stanford that has quantified this. And so the All Blacks made a rule. Yeah, this is a rule. And and they've learned this. And by the way, they've not only kicked off team members for this, they've even kicked off coaches for this, because it can apply to coaches too. And it's interesting to me because you won't find this rule in most HR manuals, right? In your company, you won't see that. But the truth is, we all should have this in our hiring guidelines. But this is even worse though, what most every company has, I've had it in all the companies I've worked at, they will have something in their hiring guidelines that says something like, in their interview process, we need to ensure cultural fit, right? You've seen that phrase, cultural fit? Which, of course, is a pretty silly phrase. It's not even clear what cultural fit means. But what happens is when you talk to the interview team, what it really means to them, hire people that look like me. It's really what happens. This is what it translates into. It usually means hire people that not only look like me, that went to the same schools I went to, that have studied the same area I studied, that, they literally have interview questions to see if they think like them. All of this is exactly the opposite of what we need. So what I'm suggesting here, and I tell this to a lot of CEOs, you need to completely revisit how you recruit and hire. Because if you think about it, what most of them are doing, so there is this big pool of candidates out there. The first thing they do is they narrow it way down to the people they think are rock stars, instead of just competent. And then they narrow it down even further to the people that look like them. Okay? So, and then of course they complain to me and everybody else that they can't find good candidates. Google hires them all. You hear it everywhere. Instead, what I'm suggesting is they have that same universe of candidates, just narrow it down to those that are competent, which is much bigger set than the people that are, quote, rock stars. And then just filter out the assholes. That's it, which is a small set. Filter them out. Now you have a much bigger funnel of people to recruit from. And these are the people that make awesome product teams. And that's really what I wanted to show you here. So let's talk about these people. Now, I'm going to show you examples of product manager, designer, and engineer, but and I'm going to point out, they are ordinary people. There is nothing, none of them went to the top universities in their countries. None of them, are what you would call those, exceptional. Early Google was famous for this. You had to be a PhD from Stanford or you weren't really even let in the door. So it's a very small group, right? But now, Bill Campbell actually helped fix that. But all of these people, while they're ordinary, they're also awesome people, the kind of people that you would all love to work with, and they are the ones that have had the kind of success we're talking about. The first one, Audrey, is a product manager in Israel. And I will also share with you my totally anecdotal opinion on this, but I have visited a lot of the tech hubs in the world, and I consider Israel to have the best teams in the world, as a generalization, but best teams in the world. And it's a weird one because they are almost everybody in Israel came from somewhere else. They came from all over the world, but one thing that I find that's special about Israel, and I think is the biggest factor for this, is that at age 18, all men and women have to serve in the military, typically for 3 years. And most of the people don't actually go on to university. They learn their software skills in the military. In fact, in high school, the level below, before university, they are tested and screened for what their aptitude is, and then the military will invite them into the program they think is most suitable. They actually invited Audrey to become a fighter pilot. And so 18 years old, they sent her out to flight school and they taught her how to fly a fighter jet. And that process of certifying everything takes about a year. And then afterwards, because she had some tech background, she was working on simulation software for the fighter jets to help what to do in emergency situations. And her commanding officer told her, okay, a couple times a year, these pilots come in for advanced training. You only have a day or two with them. And somehow, you have to get them to actually listen to you because it can save their life. And the hard part is, she's at the time 19-year-old woman. These are pretty arrogant fighter pilots that come in. They're not likely to listen to her. And so her commanding officer told her, look, first, in order for them to listen to you, they first have to trust you. And before they trust you, they have to like you enough to have that basis. And so this idea of like me, trust me, listen to me, this is what she practiced every day. To me, it's not an accident she became a strong product manager. This is very much what we do. And yeah, so she's the company she's at now is Audrey, and like I said, there's something about those Israeli teams, but what I love about them is they are so outcome-oriented. They always find a way to solve the problem. And that's a trait we're looking for to develop in all product teams. Audrey's actually a designer, one of my favorite designers. She worked with me way back at Netscape Communications. This was quite a while ago, and she was lucky because she worked for, Netscape had this amazing head of design who had come from Apple, early Apple, and he coached her to be a pretty amazing designer. And I have seen her succeed in so many different product teams over the years. And it's really because she is a living personification of what we're talking about here, of very competent, the opposite of an asshole, totally the kind of person that everybody wants to work with. And she just loves coming up with solutions to hard problems. That's kind of what she lives for. And just to be clear, this is what good designers do. Good design, I don't know what they're talking about in Amuse next door. I hope they're pointing out that good design is not look and feel. Good design is, as Steve Jobs says, it's how the whole product works. Good designers solve for constraints. That's what they do. And so they live for these hard problems. They are a partner to the product manager. Product team, squad, it's product manager, product designer, and somewhere between 2 and 10 engineers. Which leads us to our last example. Lindsay is an engineer, and she's, by the way, has built quite a reputation for herself. She's an iOS native app engineer. She's answers questions on the side on Stack Overflow. She's one of the top-rated answerers. Lindsay, the reason I like her so much as an engineer is because we need engineers that are not afraid to go toe-to-toe with the product manager, to go toe-to-toe with the CEO. We're looking for fearless engineers. I've said a million times that if you just use your engineers to code, you're only getting about half their value. We need engineers that don't just want to code, they also want to invent, because the little secret in product, the real source of innovation is typically our engineers. And Lindsay grew up, in a context, she was bullied as a kid. She was very skinny and tall and nerdy, but she loved to program, which was great. She loved to program. She went on and got a degree in computer science and drama, and then went on to become a developer. And she still also acts. She's pursuing her acting career as well. But a great example of a fearless engineer. That's really what we look for in great engineers. All right. So I just wanted you to understand that the best teams, and by the way, I've mentioned Google a few times. Google has done probably a better job of any company I know of researching the difference between their best teams and most of their teams. And they had a huge, first of all, they've shared much of their findings. If you Google the term Project Aristotle, they published many of their findings. But the big surprise was that the best teams were not comprised of rock stars. In fact, that's pretty much a recipe for a problem team. Instead, the best teams were actually comprised by ordinary people that were not assholes, honestly. And they had this, they talk in the research about this idea of psychological safety, which is a much more politically correct form of stating it, but that's what we're talking about. It really is true. So what I wanted to leave you with was there's a clear litmus test for whether or not you have truly empowered teams in your companies. Because this is one of those things, again, most CEOs tell me, oh, of course we have empowered teams. Who wouldn't today? And then it's a very simple test, and I will tell you most don't. So I want you to understand what it really defines a truly empowered team. The first point is the team, that you can't set up a team to fail. You need to make sure they have the ingredients they need to succeed in their job. And what that means is they're staffed with competent people, right? They understand the skills of their job, product manager, designer, engineers, with character, right? That are not jerks. We talked about that. And that cover the necessary range of skills. Squad, cross-functional product team, whatever you talk about. We need the set of skills. Usually that's 3 skills. We love, by the way, just to be clear, especially because we have these going on in parallel, we love having data analysts. It's just that we usually don't have enough data analysts in the company to staff as a member of each team, so they support multiple teams. Similarly, we love user researchers. Same thing, though. They more support multiple teams. But the core of the team is product design and engineering. All right, so that's the first test. The second test is, and this is really the key here, is the team is assigned business problems to solve, not given a roadmap of features to build, right? And hopefully everybody understands it's not just about who gets to decide. It's just that the difference is one is a problem and the other is a solution. The problem with features, solution, is that most of them don't work. And so delivering a roadmap is actually not very hard to do. Solving the problems behind the things on the roadmap, that's hard to do. So this is the litmus test. Is your team being assigned actual problems to solve, and then let the team figure out the best way to solve those problems? The engineers are working with the technology every day. The designers are working and interacting with the users every day. The product manager is understanding the constraints of the business and our customers' business every day. They're in the best position to figure out the right solution. And then the flip side of empowerment is accountability. So this is critical. Now that we have empowered teams, it's also fair that we step up and we are accountable to the results. Now, the truth is, unless you're using truly empowered teams, you can't really hold the team accountable. And CEOs figure this out, right? It's like, because the CEO will blame, or the CFO, they'll blame the team because something didn't work, and they'll say, look, we didn't put this on the roadmap. The vice president of International put it on the roadmap, and we were just building it. And of course, the head of International will say, well, you did a terrible job. And they get finger pointing back and forth. This is what happens. But no, in a modern product organization, in the good way, the best practice is the team is empowered to come up with a solution, but the team is held accountable to the results. Does that make sense? That's the test. So you can easily apply this to your own organization and decide if you have truly empowered teams or not. Now, if you don't, what do you do? That's a big question. which is beyond the scope of this talk, but I will just say it involves all of your company. When you talk about moving to empowered teams, it really starts with the CEO. You saw the responsibilities of leadership, the responsibilities of management, and the responsibilities of the teams. I have written a book, though, that talks about a lot of this, so you could read that. Also, those books I showed you earlier, they talk about the virtues of empowered teams, but while I strongly recommend them, they don't actually talk about how to get your organization working that way. That's a harder problem. But everybody's got my email right there. So let's see, do we have time for some questions?
Yeah, absolutely we have some time for some questions. So whooping and cheering for Marty, please.
Oh, thank you.
The more you cheer, the less question time we have, so be wary of that. We have this thing called Slido, so if you want to add a question, you can go to slido.com, and then the hashtag you have to put in is ImpactBP. Apparently impact was taken by some students somewhere. So go on and put your question. The question that gets the most upvotes will appear on the top, and Marty will answer it in the 2 minutes that we have left. Question 1 is, what should be the best approach for coaching junior product managers? Marty.
Yeah, so that is the responsibility of the hiring manager. Now, if that hiring manager does not know how to do the job, then that hiring manager's got to find somebody who can mentor that person, which is not that hard to do one way or another. There's often somebody else in the company, but it is the responsibility of the hiring manager to make sure somebody is there to coach that person. I will also tell you, I don't even like the whole concept of a junior product manager. Also often called associate product manager. To me, let's get rid of that word junior. They're either competent or they're not. Okay, we need competent product managers. No engineer wants to be on a team with a product manager that's not a competent product manager. And by the way, they'll end up wasting a lot of effort. So let's make sure that the managers step up and do their job and coach those people quickly to competence and then lose that junior title.
Okay, our next one is, what can I do as a developer? Oh, sorry, it moved. What can I do as a developer if management is not giving autonomy to my team?
Yeah, well, that's the discussion about how do you transform to this. Honestly, it's got to start from the leader. So one tip is you can give that leader some books, or at least one book. It could be from the list I described, it could be my book, but often the leaders will, once they understand that the root is that they're not working like the companies they most admire work, it usually causes some interest.
Okay, and I think we can do one more, and it's from Anonymous, and it says, I can't deal with this moving thing. How do you look for a mentor outside your company? That one at the top, Marty.
Yeah, we lost one in there. Sorry about that, but I didn't catch what it was fast enough. But how do you look for a mentor outside your company? Well, the easiest way is to go to a product tank meetup or something like that. Pretty much communities all over the world. I will warn you that the people that you really want as a mentor probably don't have time to be your mentor. So, because the most in-demand thing, the best place to learn product is to go work for a proven product manager, somebody who has been there, done that at a good product company. And honestly, I tell people, don't even worry what the company is, whether it's consumer or B2B or device. If you can get a job working for a proven product person that is willing to coach you, take the job. After 1 or 2 years of that, you will be able to work anywhere you want in product.
Okay, thank you very much. We have overrun a little bit. Marty is going to be around if people want to ask questions. He gave you his email. That's incredible. Most people don't do that, so you can ask the questions there. He's going to be back for a panel later on. We're going to take a 3-minute break, and then we'll be back up with Misty. Thank you very much again to Marty.
Thank you.